Good afternoon. I'm Rev Dave Thompson, and I'm really excited to welcome you back to our Civil Human Bible study. I'm a civil human minister, so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. So in that effort, I'm approaching the scriptures today, my own heritage and my background as a former minister within the Christian denomination, now focused purely on human peace and common ground. But I'm going back into my heritage in scriptures to try to find those teachings that I feel can be applied across the board to all humans, regardless of our faith, regardless of our politics, regardless of our lifestyle. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We're doing our forgiveness series this week, which is really exciting for me. I love this particular series because I've had an opportunity myself to think about people I may need to forgive or approaching people for forgiveness because I make mistakes, just of course like everybody, and that's why we're human. Let's go ahead and jump into the passage. It's Matthew chapter 18, and I'm only going to read 21 and 22 today. So beginning with verse 21. Then Peter came to him and said, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. And then after that, of course, in the passage, which we looked at yesterday, Jesus gives his students an example of a master or ruler who has a servant that he forgives a great amount of money for. And that servant goes to somebody who owed him just a few bucks, really, comparatively. And he puts him in jail and extracts every single cent out of this person. And of course, everybody saw it, thought it was unfair, went to the master, and this master basically took this guy and put him in the prison saying, you know, I forgave you all of that, and now you're going to go turn around and do and not extend the same to others. We talked about the difference between the law and the lifestyle of forgiveness. In this particular verse that we just talked about, these first 2 verses, when Peter says, you know, how many times do I need to? And Jesus says, well, as many times basically as it takes. So in essence, it isn't, you know, a requirement of a certain amount of times that, you know, the law requires us to forgive somebody, but it's a choice of a lifestyle of continuing to forgive people, being wise, of course, of not putting ourselves in situations where we might be hurt or injured, but when that happens, to live in a place where we will constantly forgive and allow ourselves to be free from the baggage of those hurts. And then yesterday we talked about what it actually looks like to forgive somebody and walked through the example of this king that I just mentioned and his servant and how it came about that he completely dismissed all of the debt. So it wasn't just you owe me a lot of money, I'm going to forgive you, which means I give you a little patience so you can have a couple more months to pay off the bill. No, he dismissed a very large amount of money and just washed his hands of it. And we talked about that word forgiveness, meaning to send away or to let go of something. Today, I want to talk about the psychology of forgiveness. Back in these times, of course, they didn't have those kinds of qualifiers or ways of describing human behavior. We do today. We know a lot about the brain. We understand some of the hormones that the body releases as a result of stress and as a result of love and compassion. We understand that there are stress hormones and that there are reward and pleasure hormones, and that our life is really a balance between those two. Having the chaos of life throw at us questions of our safety, and so put us in stress for fight or flight, or put us in a place where we are happy and we are satisfied and we are pleased as a person. So what happens when in the brain somebody does something to us and we need to forgive them? Let's say, for example, that somebody has stolen stolen our wallet. I had $100 in there. And our question is, what do we do now? This person came to us and said, I'm sorry, can we make this right? And let's say he even gives the $100 back. And so that there's not a whole lot of justice that has to remain. Let's say that it's really just me getting over this person stealing my money. What happens in the brain that creates the emotions and the hormones? And how does that affect the way that we live and the importance of forgiveness? In the end of this, the whole walkaway that I want to demonstrate is to show how forgiveness as a human universal value is extremely beneficial and important for us in our society. So what happens when we do have injustice? What's the psychology of that? So really there's two things that happen when there's an injustice committed against us. In the example of somebody who stole my wallet, there's an injustice, and in our brains, we are hardwired as human beings, whether we come from a place of religion or spirituality that suggests that God created us to have this sort of predisposition, this need to protect ourselves, or whether we come from a place of evolution that has created the circumstances that make us want to protect ourselves. Regardless, we all want to protect ourselves. And when somebody does something that affects our ability to feel safe, for instance, when they take my money, it puts me in a place where I might feel I'm in jeopardy because I don't have any money that I may need to pay the bills or to eat, the basics of life. I'm placed, and my mind sees it as a threat. And so what it does as a result of that, two things. One, it releases stress hormones. And these are the hormones that make us, they're cortisol and norepinephrine, for those of you who are curious. Basically, these are flooded into our body. It increases our heartbeat. It focuses all of our attention. It draws nutrients out of our body and puts them in the muscles so that we're ready to fight or run. So fight or flight. So when we have and think about justice and situations where we have had injustice committed against us, we immediately have a stressful reaction to it. It's just the way we're hardwired. I came across the video, and maybe I'll try to put it in the notes after the show, but there was a study about these two monkeys, right? One was, they were both given food, and there was a window that somebody handed them food each day. And then they watched what happened when they gave one monkey grapes and the other monkey the dry food that they've been giving the whole time. And then the next time they gave the monkey not only grapes, but like meat or something that was incredibly enticing to them. And the other monkey still got nothing, just this dry food. Well, the monkey who didn't get the nice stuff stopped eating and became obviously frustrated and angry and upset. And it was a fascinating study to me because we, in the same design of who we are, we also have those fight or flight parts of who we are as humans. And so when we see somebody who has something more than us or takes away from us in a way that puts them in a better stead or in a better position than we are and puts us at risk, that creates injustice. And when injustice happens, we need to resolve it. Until it's resolved, the emotions and the frustration and all the stress will remain. It's just the way we're wired. So the other thing that the brain does, not just release stress hormones because of the injustice, but it associates things. So it takes everything that's happened around us at that moment, the sounds that we hear, the smells, everything that we interact with in the world, the people who are around us, the context we're in, all of those are stored alongside that memory with the stress hormones. And the reason that's important for us, of course, as human beings, is that next time we come into contact with that situation, our body will release the stress hormones so we remember that this is going to possibly cause harm to us and put us in an unsafe position. So this is what happens when somebody commits an injustice against us. And when we have justice, okay, moving forward from the injustice, there's two options really. And that's why I titled this series part, A Choice Between Two Pleasures. A lot of times people don't realize that justice does give us pleasure, that we can choose not to forgive somebody and just solve the justice problem. And by doing that, it means that we will have some pleasure as a result of it. And I want to express why that is. The reason for that is because when we take care of the justice, we have dopamine released because the brain is trying to associate that memory now with good experiences, because now the justice has been taken care of. And we are able to have that part of it resolved. But here's the problem. Justice does solve that immediate stress, and so that we don't have to move forward worrying about the injustice. But what it doesn't do is take care of the memory, the associations. Remember how everything is all stored alongside that memory, and that includes the body's need to release the stress hormones? Even though with justice that we have some satiation, that we have some feeling of completion and some pleasure in that, when we decide to stop there, we still have this stress remaining. And as we go along in our lives, it may diminish some, but in many cases it doesn't. Because when we dwell on that, when we dwell on the hurt that somebody has caused us, it brings the stress hormones back to us, releases them, and because it's more stressful, because we have the stress of the original injury and now the stress of thinking about the injury, it further increases the mind's need to reinforce that this situation or this context or memory is super dangerous, which means it becomes a really strong negative feedback loop. And I've witnessed, and I know you have as well, individuals who may have even had the justice taken care of, but they don't forgive. And you may have noticed that they just become more and more enraptured in the anger and in the resentment. And because this association in the mind regarding this injury has to do with people and relationships, a relationship that hurt them, that will continue to be associated to all other relationships, because that's the way the brain works. Our brain looks for things that are connected and puts them together. So now we have an injustice, now we have a relationship that's hurt us, and it's reinforcing that in a negative way to other relationships. So that's the challenge and perhaps the negativity of only going after justice. So what's the other option? The other option is forgiveness. So what happens in forgiveness that's different or better than justice? When we solve the justice, we can do that through, the legal system, or we can do that by completely forgiving the debt. Both of those resolve the justice, meaning that the injustice has been taken care of. Whether on the books they paid us back, or on the books we just wrote it off and got rid of the debt or the injury. In our minds, we have a solution provided that allows the brain to begin to take the memory and reassociate it in different ways. But until we forgive, until we look at the memory of this person and we move it outside of the realm of stress and into a realm of compassion and love and mercy, when we develop empathy for somebody, when we begin to see the world through their eyes, when we understand what caused them to do the injury and what put them in a position that made them think that that was important, when we move to that place, our body releases positive hormones, dopamine, endorphins, these memories that give us a feeling of warmth, because that's what love does. That's what having empathy for somebody does. When we begin to share and identify with somebody, our body uses these emotions in a positive way. So the injustice has been taken care of because we've forgiven the debt, or the debt has even been paid back. That's fine too. But also, those associations that we talked about are all being repositioned outside of the stress hormones and now into positive hormones. And so now when we look back at this memory, we don't associate it with stress and potential danger. We associate it with compassion and with mercy and with empathy and warm kindness. Those feelings reward us in our minds. And that's why forgiveness is so important. Because moving forward, yes, our brain will still remind us that this happened. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing it. As we talked about originally, the Greek in that word in the scriptures that's used here, the word means to send away, literally, which means to just get rid of it. Take it and move it out of your life, however you need to do with that. And by doing that, we can move forward now because we have positive feelings associated with that. So I want to talk about what the big walkaway is here. I think in many ways it's pretty obvious. There's a lot happening right now. A lot of people demanding justice. And that's not to dismiss justice. Justice is vital and it's important. Without it, we have stress because people are put in a position where they are having to fight for survival. And there are those situations right now. People who fear police enforcement taking their lives. That is a real stress and a real concern. Police officers who feel the stress and the concern for their lives because of those who are afraid of them. These injustices create the stresses that just continue to feed off of each other. Until we can move to a place, yes, hopefully of finding justice, definitely for finding justice for the things that have been done, to right the wrongs that have been done, as much as it is possible. But more importantly than that, to stop with the anger, to stop feeding that negativity and instead put it into a place of empathy. And I want to talk about, just quickly, a current event. Police and Black Lives Matter, these are two warring factions right now in our society. And they both have legitimate issues. And until we can both look at each side and empathize with what they're feeling, empathize with the danger and the constant harassment and the constant stress of being a police officer in society where you're dealing constantly with the unpleasant parts of humanity. If we have a good police, if we have a good enforcement in our society, then that means we don't see that as much. When we don't have good police, that's when we begin to see the criminal behavior overflow into regular society. On the other hand, we do need to think and empathize with those people who are going through injustices, who do face what looks like an impossible and an uphill climb to find some safety and to feel like they're being heard and to feel like things are being responded to. Once we get this empathy and we begin to understand each other and talk about the things that we hold in common, like our desire to live the life that we want to, and to be free to do that in safety. Until we can get there, we're going to continue to have this stress. And until we can forgive the wrongs that have been committed to each other, we will not be able to move forward. So I might encourage you, I know all of us have had to face people who are adamantly on one side or another. There's just no middle ground at all, it seems like. I might encourage you, just yourself, to think about both sides, to think about why these people are fighting and protesting, why these people are worried about their lives as from the police force and have to deal with these stresses. Think about from both sides what the true feelings are so that we can move forward. I want to leave with that essentially today. That yes, injustice needs to be taken care of, but that we also need to move forward with forgiveness. That doesn't mean forgetting, but it means setting aside the anger and setting aside the hate and restoring it and reconfiguring our minds to see these situations as a learning experience, being filled with compassion and with mercy. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate so much your participation in this series, this forgiveness series. I appreciate those of you who have reached out and given me your feedback and told me that it was an encouragement to you to think about some of these things. I know myself, I've had to really think about the relationships in my life and evaluate what I'm doing to make sure that I've forgiven and that I'm working to be forgiven by others. And until tomorrow, we're going to have our fourth step in the series. We're going to talk about how to forgive somebody. There's some good practices, there's some good psychological practices, there's some good basic exercises that I've done a lot of study on, and I'm excited to bring them to you. Methods to learn how to forgive somebody, because that's sometimes a lot more difficult than we think it is. And until tomorrow, live at noon, I want to tell you, and I make sure you know, that I love you. And I hope that you choose to love yourself. It's the only love that we have any control over. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.